Hey guys, I just wanted to let you know that we are having a very special meetup in person with me, Emily.
And me, Jase.
In Sherman Oaks, California, this Saturday, November 5th at 6 p.m. at the Oaks Tavern in Sherman Oaks. So we're going to have a meetup and a discussion and just kind of hang out with all of our fans and friends, whoever wants to come, and maybe even have some karaoke if we get lucky.
What?
So... Yes. Again, that is on this Saturday, November 5th at 6 p.m. at the Oaks Tavern in Sherman Oaks.
We'll see you there, I hope.
If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
if you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
But if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
And this is the Multiamory podcast. On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we are talking about masculinity and polyamory. We're uncovering some of the fundamentals of masculinity and looking at how this can both be negative and positive in certain ways as it relates to polyamorous ideas and thoughts. And also, video is back. We hit our goal. We hit our goal on Patreon, which was that we would start doing video podcasts again. So if you're listening to this right now and are like, you know what, I would much rather watch them on their webcams, then go to our YouTube channel or our website, and you can watch the video version of this podcast.
You can see me lounging in my temporary throne that I have here.
Yeah, I'm not in a throne.
Nor am I.
I have the perfect thing to kind of segue us into this topic, as it were.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Talking about visual medium, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about masculinity, talking about men and boys, and all those
men
type
and
of chaps.
boys.
Okay. Third thing, it's Halloween, or by the time this episode has come out, it will have just been Halloween. So before we kind of dig into this topic properly, what do we think about sexy male Halloween costumes?
They're great.
Sexy male Halloween costume.
First of all, tell me, give me examples of sexy male Halloween costumes, because we all know the shtick that with a woman she can just like slap on whatever skimpy thing, and you know what's the joke for Mean Girls? That she can just wear lingerie and animal ears, and then she's good to go. You know, like yeah, sure, we got it. Like ladies wear sexy Halloween costumes, but what are the sexy dude costumes?
I mean, you could be a sexy superhero. Like, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people that I know have done sexy superhero costumes.
Right.
Didn't Johnny, like, have a Captain America shield that he just placed over his scantily clad body? And
well, yeah, he did, like, there's sort
I
of
want to see
been
pictures
this...
of that.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like you were there for that one. But yeah, there was that... There's kind of a thing in parts of the nerd community of guys doing versions of superheroes that are like in the style of female outfits for superheroes. So it's like, you know, he was Captain America but with like little booty shorts on, and like you know what I mean? Like it's kind of I don't know, taking that like switch. You can find pictures if you search for this online of know, people from Comic-Con or whatever, guys doing like the sexy version of different superheroes and stuff.
It's like doing like the sexualized version of it.
Exactly.
Which is the way that like normal female superheroes are usually portrayed.
Right, exactly. And that is kind of the point of it, to be like, hey, you know, look at this difference here. I don't know, I feel like when I did my Red Sun Superman, normal, not effeminized or like
sexy.
Scantily clad.
I mean, it wasn't super sexualized, but it was sexy.
It wasn't sexualized, but I still did get a lot of comments from people that I know, and of people being like, "That's a really sexy costume." I guess because it's like very form-fitting.
It's like form-fitting, yeah. So,
how's that?
And, you know, Russian always makes me think of sex.
Does it?
Yeah.
Doesn't it do it for you?
I don't know.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Communism for surezies.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Well, also
gets the panties dropping.
Yeah.
Josh and I have done gender swapped costumes the last 2 years, which I really like. So he's gone as like the female character and I've gone as the male character, but then we kind of like put a masculine or feminine twist on it. So yeah, like last year we went as Mario and Princess Peach, but he was Prince Peach and I was Lady Mario.
Right.
But his Prince Peach, even though it was technically masculine, I mean, it was still quite androgynous-ish, I suppose.
Yeah,
androgynous.
Really liked. Androgynous.
Androgynous?
That's a great new term. Androgynous.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Exactly.
But I feel like androgynous already captures what androgynous is trying to convey.
That's true. Yeah. You probably don't need to add the ish.
Yeah, we don't need the softener unless we're speaking in Japanese, as it were.
Yeah, the little androgyny.
All right, so...
Anyway, well, sorry to get us off on a Halloween tangent, but
yes.
we can actually get
Hope you had
properly,
fun. Hope you had some good, clean fun.
Yeah, I hope everyone had a good Halloween. I know that I did. So one of the things that inspired this topic, I mean, this is a topic that we've been wanting to cover for quite a while, because I think it's incredibly relevant to all of our lives, whether we're polyamorous or not, is kind of this idea of what masculinity is, like what it means to be masculine. And a lot of times in the poly community, masculinity is talked about as sort of a universally bad thing, or maybe talked about in the way that it tries to put down or control women. But the focus of this episode, we'll talk about some of that, but is a little bit more about how enforcing masculinity on men is hurtful to the men as well. And that it's kind of that feminism isn't just something that would benefit women if we were all behind it, but actually would benefit all of us. So that's kind of the overarching theme here. And part of this was inspired by an email that Franklin Vo posted online that he received. Dedeker, did you want to talk about that? Did you have that up?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I don't really want to justify this person by reading their email aloud. I'd rather just summarize it. But basically, it was, it was an email from a hater, basically saying like, dude, like, I can tell just by looking at you that you're a beta. If a girl is just trying to keep you around as an option, you need to hang around some alpha males, and if a girl tells you she's poly, then you just need to dump her. So, but he definitely, he only commented on it a little bit, but specifically talking about the fact that there was like this specific targeted thing of like, oh, you're beta, like you're beta male, you're not an alpha male because you're poly, because the woman that you're with is sleeping around with other people.
Right, that you're not in control of her or something.
And even the idea of like alpha beta.
Well, yeah.
Is shitty. Just like to throw that on men at all. Be like, oh, you have to be an alpha male. Like that's a good deal.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely.
So,
but it got me thinking about is the fact that there is kind of this contradiction specifically with polyamorous men. Because the fact that it's like on one side you can look at it and be like, oh, here's a man who has a lot of partners, and especially if it's a lot of female partners. Right. Like, wow, that's really hyper masculine. He's banging a bunch of ladies. Like poly is maybe the most masculine thing you can do. But then on the other side, the fact that like, well, these ladies are also banging dudes that aren't you. Well, that's cuckolding. That's clearly something that only a beta male could allow. And
Right.
And so that's why, we really wanted to dig into this topic, because it's this interesting contradiction for men who are within the poly scene.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, let's not even go into right now the idea of poly people sort of being poly, opening up possibilities of exploring the fluidity of your sexuality. Like that's even further on the side of like, like that's not masculine. You're a wuss. Like that's not okay. Right. So there's even if it's just in heterosexual relationships, there's still kind of this judgment that can get put on it of like, oh man, you're being such a pussy or you're such a beta because, you're not owning these women entirely, that they're sleeping with other dudes.
Yeah.
So then on the other side of it, though, even, from women, there can be that judgment, essentially the same judgment of like, oh, well, you just want to be a player because you're poly and sleep with all these women and like not commit to any of them, like, ugh, gross. Or is this the opposite side is the positive? I guess so, like from either side, like it's still those two sides, but the positives and negatives are switched.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting that, it seems like, well, first of all, our standards for masculinity, clearly, like, they aren't really doing men any favors, particularly, men who do choose to kind of step outside of the box and pursue non-traditional relationships. So, we want to kind of go into just a quick kind of deconstruction of what our society, like, says masculinity is. And of course, like, we want to give the disclaimer that obviously, like, not all men are this way. Yeah, hashtag not all men. Yeah.
Right.
Of course, every man is an individual. But something that, Kathy Labriola, who we've had on this podcast before, she's a poly counselor and therapist, she made a point once that, even if you don't necessarily identify as terribly masculine or terribly feminine, or even if you're genderqueer, or if you don't identify with what your anatomical sex is, even if you define your own gender non-traditionally, it still can be so hard to deprogram the things that are taught you by socialization, which is a lot of what gender is.
Right, definitely. Like we were talking a little bit earlier about, how differently toys are marketed to boys and girls. And that, regardless of how you identify later in life, from an early age, you're given these certain types of words, certain types of images based on your gender. And so, yeah, it is a very hard thing to deprogram. Before we get into kind of our, like, talking about what masculinity means, like Dedeker said, it's not the same for all men. This is not... The point of this is not that these are traits that describe men at all, actually, but that these are the traits that socially are kind of enforced upon men. That if you don't fit these sort of things, you can be criticized for it, right? Called names.
You're not a real man.
Or could be beaten up or like whatever, right? That these are the sort of things that are enforced upon us. And the elusive thing about it is that we're taught as boys to be a man. Like, be a man is such a common thing. And even as adults, it's a thing that gets thrown around. But it's not really clear what being a man means. Like, it can mean different, sometimes contradictory things in different contexts. And it's this really unfortunate situation that we've set up where we're taught as men to be pursuing this idea of being a man and being masculine, but there's not even a clear definition of what that is, right? That it's this sort of elusive, unattainable thing that we're meant to feel bad about not living up to. So it is sort of this problematic thing. But going into that, like, what are some traits, though, that you do think of as, masculinity? Like, what is that?
Like a strong physically, like, very strong human.
Yeah,
That's like a manly thing.
Yeah,
right.
like a man, like manly shoulders, like broad shoulders, broad chest,
Big
tall.
pecs.
Yeah, big pecs,
Yeah.
big rippling
Sure.
pecs and abs. Maybe a little bit sweaty,
Kind of like
but the sweat, yeah.
Right, like sort of the superhero concept of, or like action
Yeah.
hero concept of what a man looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something we also talked about as being respected, right? So rather than I mean, maybe the action hero, but even, in our movies, we'll see it's the, the high-powered business person or something, right? That everyone looks up to.
There's the alpha again.
Right, they're alpha. They're powerful and they're respected by other men and by women, right? What
also
else?
that they might be, like, intimidating, so, like, nobody's gonna fuck with them.
Sure,
Yeah.
that idea of, like, nobody fucking with you is definitely one of
Yeah.
those things.
Almost a little, like, fear-based, potentially. Or just to maybe, like, so utterly respected that nobody's going to mess with you.
Yeah, what else?
Well, so no one will fuck with you unless you want them to, and they are a beautiful lady. As in, yes, like very virile, like being a player, like being very sexually active, like able to get a lot of women, able to seduce women, able to have as many
able to
women
get a
as
lot
he
of
wants.
sex. Yeah.
Like lots of sex, like definitely.
Yeah, able
is a super masculine trait.
To be real technical about that one too, it also carries over into needing to be able to have an erection at any time. And that if you don't, that's something that men will beat themselves up about or try to go to these extreme lengths to fix this problem. Know, because that is part of this idea of being a masculine man, is that like you can have sex at the drop of a hat any time, right? That like physically you're able
just,
to
like,
do
so
that.
dripping with testosterone at any moment.
Right. I mean, another one that really resonates for me is this idea of never showing weakness, or being stoic, never crying, right? Like,
and that one's like, from a young age, men are taught that for sure.
Right, like boys don't cry, the whole stereotypical thing, right? Of that all of your negative emotions need to be under control. Like, it's okay to be angry, but not to be sad. Right? It's not okay to be scared or sad, but anger's okay because you need to get it out somehow. So that's the outlet that we're given.
I'm gonna beat someone up.
Right, beat someone up, or I'm gonna break something, or I'm gonna yell, or right, something like that. And then also the idea that the ideal man should be wealthy, needs to be rich, because we have
a provider,
and be a provider, right? But part of that is also I've definitely found that myself and other guys will really beat themselves up personally over not having money, over not being rich. That it's not just like, I wish I had money because I wish I had money, but it's like a personal value judgment of yourself, like your own worth as a man is tied to money as well. Because again, look at our representations in movies and books and stuff like that, like TV shows. Almost everyone's
basically
got
Bruce
quite
Wayne.
a bit of money.
No, I was gonna say like Tony Stark is who I thought of. I was like,
Sure.
like Tony Stark is like it hits every single one of these on the list.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but here's the funny part, though, is that it's not just those sort of obvious examples of super rich like Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, but even just if you watch your normal TV shows, everyone owns a house or owns an apartment, for example. Like, even that level of wealth is just like, if you don't have that, if a guy character lives with roommates, for example, he's generally going to be the guy who either by the end of that thing is going to grow to like own his own place and be more successful in business and money, or he's just the
Seth
character
Rogen
who's sort of
knocked
like that guy, exactly, like Seth Rogen knocked up.
I didn't
is
even
that
think about
trajectory.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
but that's a good point.
That-
In order to win the girl, he has to like be
Exactly.
out of his roommate's house, and
he has to figure out how to make money,
get a job.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
And like
Exactly.
not living with his like family, like not living like with his parents or his grandparents.
Right. Oh
or
God, that's even
something
worse.
that.
Yeah, of course.
That's
oh
even
yeah.
worse,
Yeah. Definitely. But kind of this idea of everyone on TV has these big houses or big apartments, and really they only have apartments if they live in New York in the show. But pretty much anywhere else, even if the show takes place in Los Angeles, they almost always own a house, which is something that just blows my mind.
Yeah,
it's like,
I was
no
sorry,
one
this
here
is like a
owns
total
houses.
tangent. I know in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, like his love interest is like a struggling actress, and she like has a house on Venice Beach.
Right.
Like, and
right.
with that movie, as great as that movie is, that's always what kills like my suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
So I'm like, come on.
Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Great. So before we get into picking apart some of the positives and negatives and what we can get out of this, we're going to take a quick little break to talk about our Patreon. If you guys would like to be part of the discussion with us more, we have this really rapidly growing, amazing community on our Patreon. If you go to Patreon, patreon.com/multiamory, you can join there, pick an amount that you want to contribute to help us keep doing this, help keep growing, doing more live meetups. We would love to start doing stuff like that in other cities. There's a lot of exciting stuff we have coming up here. It really helps us to do that, and also gives you access to a community of people who also want to support this show, we have amazing discussions in our private Facebook group that's only for patrons at the $5 and up level. And once a month, which is actually also coming up this weekend, the same day as our hangout, is our online video discussion group for the $9 and over category. But even just for $1 a month, you get to be part of our Patreon community, see some fun behind the scenes stuff, and help us to keep doing this show. So check it out at patreon.com/multiamory.
Mm-hmm. And so another thing that you guys can do if you want to support our show, and probably the easiest and cheapest thing that you can do to support our show, is to just write us a review. Wherever it is that you listen to our podcast, if it's iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, wherever it is, just take 2 minutes, probably less than 2 minutes, and just leave us a quick little review. It helps us show up kind of higher in search results. It helps more people find our podcast. And it also lets us know that you love us, and also makes Jase cry specifically.
Yeah, sometimes they do.
We love doing. And also, Dame Dedeker Winston has a book coming out.
Did you just call me Dame? Did you just call me Dame Dedeker Winston?
That's great.
I mean, I'm
Dame
definitely
Dedeker.
sitting in like a Dame-worthy chair right now.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
true.
Exactly.
Right.
In February what? 2017?
February 7th.
7th.
February
On the 7th of
7th.
February. Yes.
2017.
Mm-hmm. 1 week
Girls'
before
Guide.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
Smart Girls
newly
Guide to
available for pre-order, both in
Mhm.
hard copy and on Kindle. And I just got a peek at what the inside's going to look like, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
Good.
I read a little preview and I wanted to read more, so I'm excited to actually get to
I
read
can't wait
it.
to
Got-
read mine.
Yes.
Got a little teaser.
Yes.
For sure.
Awesome. And then we have one other cool little offer for you guys that's new. And that is, if you haven't heard about Loot Crate, you should check it out. Loot Crate. I'll be very
Loot Crate?
proper with my enunciation. Is a monthly subscription box where you get a bunch of fun, nerdy things, right? Like little toys or other kind of cool collectible nerdy things. They also specifically introduced a Firefly-themed Loot Crate that you can get instead of the normal Loot Crate. Both of them are super fun, though. I have a lot of friends. Actually, a coworker just yesterday was talking about some of the cool things that he got in his Firefly Loot Crate. Firefly. In his Firefly Loot Crate. It was really cool. But anyway, if you would like to try it out, you can get 10% off of a new monthly subscription by using our promo code MULTI, M-U-L-T-I, at checkout.
Yay.
Yay. Okay, let's hop back into this. So we just talked about all, we kind of painted with a broad brush this idea of masculinity and kind of, the broadest of brushes. All these things have been handed down to men, and to women, this also gets kind of injected into women's expectations of men as well.
Right.
For sure.
We're definitely not immune in this. But what I wanted to think about was obviously not all of these traits are necessarily bad things. Being a provider is not a bad thing. Being respected is definitely not a bad thing. And so I was wondering, what are the traits of masculinity that are healthy? And specifically, what are the traits of masculinity that are actually the most useful for men who are involved in non-monogamous relationships?
I'd say probably emotional management is a good one. And I've heard it, and probably this is also just social conditioning, but a lot of people will say, I love hanging out with guys because they're not petty, they're not flippant, they're not passive aggressive. If they have an issue, then they just tell you right away, hey, this is fucked up, let's not do that.
I hadn't put that together, but I've definitely heard that same kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, from that standpoint, I've definitely used that argument, oh, it's fun hanging out with men just because, they're not passive, and I appreciate that. They're not going to, stab you in the back, which is not necessarily fair or true that women would do that all over the place, but it is nice to have,
also to be
emotional
devil's
management.
advocate, I've definitely met some very passive-aggressive men.
True.
Well, but
absolutely.
that's the thing we need to remember here, is that both of these are not true of all men or all women.
No.
The point is, though, that our social conditioning does encourage men to be straightforward and more confrontational, and does encourage women to not do that, which then can lead to feeling like backstabbing or being passive aggressive or something. And absolutely there's passive aggressive men and there's very direct women, most of whom I end up being attracted to, like the two of you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're sitting with two of them.
Yeah, exactly. But right, that idea of that, we talked about it earlier as like a negative thing, right? About never showing weakness, like never crying, being stoic all the time. But there is something to be said for the positive version of that, which is having some emotional management, right? A little bit of control over, like, I'm not going to just freak out and get upset right away. I'm going to kind of hold on to this for a moment and figure out what to do with it. Unfortunately, when you try to hold it in all the time, it does come out a lot as anger, as we were talking about earlier. But yeah, no, that's definitely one that is, as an example of a very good trait of being kind of direct. And I think that goes into the next one. Dedeker, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I feel like because of the fact that like men are socialized to be much more direct and to be much more vocal and to not be scared necessarily to speak up about things, that makes them just much better at advocating for their own needs within a relationship. You know, like I do feel like that is a masculine trait that is extremely useful within non-monogamous relationships, because the fact that like you do have to negotiate and express your boundaries. You do have to negotiate what it is that you want, what it is that you don't want. You do have to have that willingness and that courage to just directly say to your partner, hey, this is what I want.
This is what I want.
I'm not getting, or hey, I'm not getting what it is that I need. And I feel like women tend to be socialized more in the opposite direction of like, don't rock the boat, don't make waves. You know, if you do need something like that, don't be confrontational about it. So I would say that probably is a trait of, you know, quote unquote classic masculinity that is actually quite helpful in non-monogamous relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it also, sorry, my mind just went in like 10 different directions at once, like hearing you talk about that. Like this idea of kind of speaking up for what you need and what you want. I feel like something to be aware of, though, is that the language that we use in asking for it, that I think sort of the dark side of that, though, is if it's not asking for what you need or want, but sort of demanding it, kind of the difference between self-advocacy and entitlement. And I think that this is something that actually the three of us were talking about before, is kind of the difference in the type of language that men and women are taught to use about what they want, especially when it comes to sex, is kind of the more sort of direct, you could even say like harsher language that men are taught to use. You know, not taught by our parents or teachers, but taught by our movies and our, you know, the porn that's out there, and by what our friends would say, right? Like using kind of harsher language that can be, that even if the woman you're talking to might ultimately want the same things as you, because, you know, women actually do like sex just as much as men do. Many studies have shown this.
As it turns
out, both genders like sex, which is crazy, right? But that she might even want that same thing, but if you approach it with that sort of masculine language that we're taught, it's like, it's very like off-putting and doesn't make a woman feel like she's going to get anything enjoyable for herself out of that sex. So it's like, well, I'd rather not have that then, because it doesn't seem like it's something that's going to be good for me too, right? So I think there's sort of that other side of like, it's good to vouch for what you need, but you know, doing it in a way that's lifting everyone up, and it's like, hey, look, there's going to be awesome stuff in this for both of us instead of just for me.
One last thing before we move on from this that I wanted to point out. A couple episodes ago, we talked about the idea of using one's own privilege for good. And I think, honestly, that is the biggest thing that like traditionally masculine males can bring to the polyamorous community, is this idea of like yes, like I do have multiple girlfriends, and yes, they all do have multiple boyfriends, and yes, that's freaking great.
Right.
Like the fact that like, especially as like a white, heterosexual male, that like your voice is going to be listened to more and carry more weight than anybody else's. And so to have more voices like that, like more of the Franklin Voes of the world.
Powerful thing.
Yeah, or like Dwayne Lehman, or like you, Jase, like more
of the Jase Lindgrens.
More of the Jase Lindgrens. To be very vocal about that, of not not necessarily wrapping it up in a rhetoric that's surrounded by feminism or sensitivity or anything like that, but being like, I'm a normal dude and like I'm fine with this and it doesn't threaten me at all.
Yeah, there's something in that you just said too about not being reactionary and feeling some need to like fight against what's already existing or what's going on, but just kind of being an example of like, hey, like I'm a very comfortable, confident man, so I'm gonna give an example to my friends and the people that know me to show, hey, here's a different way you could do it. Because something I've definitely found is that regardless of what sort of labels people put on masculinity or these traits, if you're just comfortable being you, that's a very masculine thing. I mean, that's something that other men are going to look at that and go, fuck, like that guy seems so much more manly than me. And they might not know why. They might try to come up with these other reasons or argue against you or something, but it's really just that comfortableness in your own skin, that confidence.
Yeah, well, there is something to masculinity that comes in a sense of ownership. And I mean, that can be like bad ownership, that can be like ownership over my girlfriend or ownership over this place or ownership over all my things. But with masculinity comes a sense of ownership of myself. Like, here I am.
Right.
And like, I'm confident and bold and this is who I am.
Yeah, definitely. And that's hugely powerful. That just, and again, I think it comes from this idea that, we're all taught that we need to try to be a man, but like that definition is so elusive and so contradictory and like it's really unattainable. Like it's impossible to really even be that. Like, and so I think that people who are concerned with being manly, like we're all taught to be, there is sort of this constant feeling of like, I can never be comfortable or confident because I'm never living up to this ideal of what I should be as a man. And so I think kind of having that confidence is why that can also be threatening to other guys as well, but is also something that they admire at the same time, of just kind of being like, hey, like I'm comfortable being this, or even, showing other guys that you're comfortable with women in positions of authority, right? If you have a female boss or something, that like to just be a good example of like, yeah, of course, sure, she's my boss because she's my boss. Like it has nothing to do with gender at all. It's just like that's just what it is, and I'm totally cool and comfortable with it.
For sure.
Yeah, considering that like more than half of my bosses are women where I work, I'm also like, yeah, great.
Do we count as bosses to you? Probably not.
We're colleagues.
Maybe at certain moments.
Well, yeah.
At certain moments.
Yes, we'll see. We'll see. Anytime we're doing something that you guys don't like, I'm the boss making you do it.
It's so true.
The rest of the time, you guys are the bosses.
Get like angry,
Okay, so I want to, for us to wrap this up, I want to bring it back to kind of something you mentioned at the beginning, Jase, which was about, if we relax our ideas around sexuality for both men and women, and especially for women, it makes it better for all of us. So Emily, you had something interesting about this.
Oh yeah, no, just the fact that like women tend to be tenderness entitled but sexually repressed, whereas men are on the other side. They tend to be sexually entitled but tenderness repressed. And so essentially, like, women, just whatever age you are, can touch another woman or like even kiss another woman or hold their hands and like not necessarily be called bisexual or lesbian. But men, if they, from a very young age, that's kind of stamped out of them if they're, hugging and kissing on their boyfriends, from a very young age, and not even necessarily in like a sexual manner, but it's kind of taught like, no, that's not okay.
Yeah.
It's not okay to have these like feminine responses or tender responses towards another male.
Right. I had
you're gay if you do.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I had a time in middle school where I had some friends over and I was sitting on my bed with my arm like around a guy friend.
Yeah.
And I was 13 or something probably. And like later like had a talk with my stepdad, or he had a talk with me about like being concerned about that behavior. Yeah.
Jeez.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, seriously?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Being, that's where I kind of got the talk at that time about like, we're not sure that, you would go to hell for being gay, but like we do think it makes God sad at least. Like,
oh my God.
Right?
Sorry. It's not funny. It's not funny, but the phrasing
it's not,
is
but it is funny. It is funny looking back. But
it's like he's not gonna punish you, he's just gonna like kind of look sternly and like maybe sigh a little bit when you get to heaven.
He's not angry, he's just disappointed. Yeah.
God.
Right, but just that's a very real thing, and honestly, like,
well, hang on. What do you remember? What your stepdad said to you specifically, other than it being a God thing?
Well, just that he was like a little bit concerned that I might, be gay because of that.
Because you put your arm around.
Wow. Yeah, because he walked by while I had my
automatically went to that.
Right. It was sort of that I was, in a pose or posture or like
position.
Right. That I was doing something that kind of hinted at that or seemed like
you should have like really quickly like slid it into like a headlock, because that's acceptable.
That would be acceptable.
Given him
that
a
would have been
noogie
acceptable
or something.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, just kidding, noogie.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the thing, is what I was going to say though is that I'm actually would count myself as very fortunate in that interaction, in that I didn't get beat up by my friends. My stepdad didn't yell at me. He was operating from his own existing beliefs about sexuality and religion and masculinity and all of that, but I didn't get nearly as negative a response as I could have for that same sort of thing, right? And this was also with like my friends over too. Like there was a bunch of us all hanging out that just happened to happen, and no one made a deal out of it. So I actually would count myself very fortunate in that. But a lot of guys would not have had, even that civil of a response to it.
Sure.
Yeah. But then your thing, Dedeker, about turning it into a headlock, I think is great, because it does touch on this idea of, and I love that the term that Emily mentioned that we had read somewhere about women being tenderness entitled. And I did think it was kind of interesting to look at like what an awesome, cool entitlement advantage that is that you have as women.
For sure.
And to just kind of sure, like we could have a whole discussion about entitlement and who's more of a victim than anyone else, and like that's not what we're talking about here, because it's not the scope of this conversation. But I do think it's interesting to look at that advantage of like that is something that you have, because as a guy, from a very young age, it's not socially acceptable for us to touch anyone really, unless it's violent. Unless it's wrestling. Like that's why I think boys will wrestle so much or fight each other so much. It's because we as humans like touch, right? We want physical touch. But if you think about it, in our society, like the only time it's acceptable for a man to really touch someone else, besides like a handshake, is if he's being intimate or having sex with a woman, or that's it. Or I guess their child.
Well, fucking or fighting. It's just fucking or fighting.
Fucking or fighting, or holding your child.
Beyond the age of like 6.
The other exception. Right, exactly. But you can't. Whereas, as you said, like as women, you can hold hands, you could cuddle, you can hug. Like that's more acceptable for women to be able to do that. And I think that this is a big one to kind of be aware of, like if we can all take some baby steps toward normalizing non-violent, non-sexual male touch, right?
Yeah, totally.
Of kind of accepting that, I think would be.
But okay, I want to like, what are those baby steps? Because like that's so ingrained in us. Like if you just like reach out, Jase, right now, if I like just watch you, even as an adult man, go put your arm around somebody, like. Or like grab another man's hand, it's like immediately that's where it goes to. It's like either it's going to be a noogie or it's going to be something sexual. I mean, not that like that's where my mind personally goes to, but it's like just that, you know.
What about the idea of consent? To be like, hey, like, I want to hug you right now. Like, may I hug you, or may I, like, put my arm around you?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
yeah, we've talked about, like, how consent is a big thing that is taken for granted. In some polyamorous communities as well. But if you were to ask someone and then do it, I don't know.
Yeah,
Would that help?
I've also found that my experience of as like a fairly nonconformist guy, that I've actually found that other men are not as negative in their response to it as you think they would be. In terms of just basic touch of kind of like putting your arm around someone, or like prolonging that physical contact more than just a handshake or something like that. That there is something kind of nice about it, and I think they get that. And as long as it doesn't trip this like social alarm of like, oh, I'm doing something that's not okay, I've found that actually guys really appreciate it. They really enjoy it. I think because of that, because we're so starved for that affection and human touch.
Yeah.
So I would say it might not be, use your own judgment and be safe out there, but I would say it's not necessarily this as dangerous a thing as we think that it is.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that in doing this
in
too,
conclusion, go touch some people, but get consent first.
Get consent first. Yes. I had a really cool moment actually watching TV yesterday, where one of those ads for the helpful Honda people, those ads where they'll do some like random act of kindness for someone. They did this one where they found this woman and her son shopping at a store, and they were like, hey, we're the helpful Honda people. Like, we're going to pay for, whatever you can fit in your cart in the next 5 minutes or something. They're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then at the end, like right at like sort of the last shot of the commercial, is her saying to the helpful Honda guy, she's like, is it okay if I hug you? And he's like, yeah. Aww. And they hug. And I was like, wow, what a cool example of consent in a commercial that you almost never see, right? Like that interaction is so foreign to most people. But it's really cool to be like, wow, that's awesome that she asked first, and that they put that, they didn't just cut to them hugging, but they put that in the commercial. I was like, that's really neat. I really enjoyed that.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. So we would love to hear what all of you think about this. If you have some thoughts, or there's something you felt like we missed, or something that could be really helpful to other people, write that in the comments for this episode on our website, or start a discussion on our Facebook group, Multiamory, or if you're in our Patreon, you can talk with other people about it there. We'd love to get you involved in the discussion, or perhaps come talk to us about it this Saturday at the Oaks Tavern in Sherman Oaks at 6:00. But yeah, we would love to get you involved in the conversation. You can also email us at info@multiamory.com. You can tweet at us at Multiamory, or our Instagram, which is Multiamory_podcast. Yes. Emily is our Instagram guru.
Guru.
Awesome. We would love to hear from you and get involved more with this community. So thank you all so much. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, this is Dan Savage from the Savage Lovecast and Savage Love, and you're listening to a Swing Set podcast at Swing Set FM.